In the final weeks of the Second World War, as the world teetered between ruin and revelation, entire networks of secrecy began to move beneath the smoke and surrender. Deep within collapsing German lines, intelligence couriers carried orders marked only with single letters, and Allied intercept teams logged transmissions that seemed to come from places already destroyed. Files vanished before reaching London. Crates crossed borders that no longer existed. What followed the end of the war was not silence, but a shadow war of missing archives, erased operations, and untraceable scientists whose loyalties blurred with every passing border. These are the fragments that never reached the history books, the stories buried beneath redacted signatures and sealed vaults. What remains are only the code names, the coordinates, and the faint echo of orders never meant to be heard again. Chapter 1: The Forgotten Vaults of Operation Eclipse. In early April 1945, as Allied troops surged toward Berlin, the Office of Strategic Services and British Intelligence Command authorized a joint infiltration codenamed Operation Eclipse. Its stated objective was the neutralization of Nazi command structures before Soviet forces could occupy them. The true mission, however, was buried beneath the operational paperwork. A classified directive issued by Chef's Advanced Intelligence Unit to locate and secure experimental materials believed to be hidden in the Harz Mountains of central Germany. According to later declassified memoranda, these materials were of high scientific and national significance, their nature unspecified. The Eclipse team comprised 12 men, led by Major Robert Kinlan of the US Army's 10th Armored Division and Captain Harold Greaves of British SIS. They moved under cover of darkness on April 7, 1945, through the forest near Nordhausen, posing as a standard engineering survey unit. Their objective point, Sector 42B, near the town of Elrich, had been heavily bombed weeks earlier. The surrounding terrain was littered with remnants of Mittelwerk, the underground complex where Werner von Braun's engineers had assembled the V-2 rockets. Yet the coordinates provided by Greaves's orders did not lead to Mittelwerk's known entrances. They led deeper into a sealed valley where aerial reconnaissance showed nothing but collapsed rock and forest. At 0430 hours, the team established perimeter security around a concrete hatch exposed by artillery fire. The hatch was circular, bearing no military insignia, only a stenciled code, OB7. Kinlan ordered the demolition specialist to open it. Beneath lay a vertical shaft descending 30 meters, lined with steel. A narrow ladder led to a corridor, its walls embossed with faded German script. Within, they found a series of storage rooms filled with sealed wooden crates. A German document recovered on site identified the facility as Unterlager Morgenröte, sublevel Dawnlight, classified under the Reich Research Council. Inside the first chamber, the crates contained technical journals, film reels, and partially disassembled machinery labeled Antrieb Vector A13. The lettering corresponded to known components of V-2 propulsion systems, but several crates bore an additional stamp. Obersalzberg Directive 7-1. Greaves immediately ordered the entire cache photographed and inventoried. According to the surviving field notes in the Greaves collection, Box 9, Q Archives, the final 3 crates were marked Biologische Versuchsreihe. Their contents were never described in the report, only that the crates were secured for upper review, and that all personnel were to observe radio silence at 0720 hours. Kinlan attempted to transmit a status update to SHAF Forward Command. The transmission failed twice, each time disrupted by high-frequency interference. The operator noted the interference as consistent, patterned, not random. Minutes later, Private Lyle Henderson, who had been assigned to inventory the far corridor, returned in visible distress. He reported hearing voices, German, female, through a ventilation shaft, though the structure was long abandoned. Henderson's report was dismissed at the time as stress-induced hallucination, but his written statement remains attached to the mission file, annotated in red pencil. Possible auditory relay or radio bleed, check source. By 0900 hours, Kinlan ordered the removal of all documentation to Allied custody. The convoy departed Elrich under heavy fog, bound for a collection site near Kassel. However, the manifest listing the Eclipse cargo disappears from Schaeff's logistics chain after that date. No customs records, convoy logs, or requisition forms reference it again. When the war ended weeks later, neither Kinlan nor Greaves were present at the official debriefings. Kinlan was reassigned to Occupation Forces Munich. Greaves was reported missing near Hanover, April 23rd. In 1952, during a NATO Intelligence Oversight Committee hearing, Colonel John S. Bradshaw of the U.S. Air Technical Intelligence Unit made a brief statement regarding retrieved Axis scientific materials classified beyond top secret. He referenced a sealed storage zone within Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, identified only as E7 Hards. Bradshaw's testimony was immediately redacted in the official record. 2 years later, an internal British memorandum titled Paperclip Subset, Eclipse Personnel, listed 3 names: Kinlan, Greaves, and a civilian scientist, Dr. Anton Weiss, formerly attached to the Reich Research Council. Weiss had been relocated to Fort Detrick under contract to the US Army Biological Warfare Division. The most revealing document surfaced decades later, in 1994, when portions of the Eclipse file were accidentally released during a FOIA audit of Cold War-era archives. Among the contents was a faded photograph, grainy, monochrome, depicting an underground chamber lined with steel canisters. Each canister bore the same stencil, OB7. At the bottom of the image, a handwritten caption read, "Recovered under Directive 7, April 8, 1945, containment protocols in effect." The photograph's reverse carried a US Army stamp dated 1951. No further description was included. German post-war testimony adds another layer. During interrogation at Camp King, Frankfurt, Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, a propulsion engineer formerly at Mittelwerk, described a parallel program that had nothing to do with rocketry. According to Reinhardt, the Reich Research Council maintained a subdepartment under SS oversight, known internally as Projekt Morgenröte. Its task was the study of human reaction to extreme acceleration and atmospheric compression, research which allegedly required test environments with high electromagnetic containment. Reinhardt claimed that when the Allies advanced, SS officers sealed the facility, locking both researchers and subjects inside. His statement was deemed unreliable and omitted from official reports. In the 1970s, rumors of a missing vault in the Harz resurfaced through West German local accounts. Excavation teams searching for wartime tunnels near Elrich discovered collapsed steel passages inconsistent with known blueprints of Mittelwerk. The German Ministry of the Interior denied authorization for any further exploration, citing unexploded ordnance risk. Independent researcher Ulrich Keppel, who obtained partial access to the site in 1979, reported encountering radiation spikes near a sealed bulkhead and fragments of American ammunition dating from April 1945. His findings were dismissed by official investigators, but his field journal contains one chilling note. Found plate fragment, stenciled OB7, US marking scratched off. Today, the name Operation Eclipse survives only in fragments of oral testimony and redacted intelligence reports. The official Allied summary lists it as a strategic reconnaissance of former German armament sites. Yet within the National Archives Record Group 226, Box 332, a single document remains sealed under Title 50 restrictions. Its label reads Eclipse, Vault 7, classified until Review 2031. The page beneath it, visible through translucent paper, bears a line typed in faded courier font. Recovered contents transferred per joint directive, May 1945, destination undisclosed. Whatever lay beneath those mountains in the final days of the Reich, it was deemed valuable enough to erase from every surviving record. Some historians believe it was merely another cache of stolen research, buried under the weight of bureaucracy and war. But others, including declassified statements from former OSS operatives, suggest it was something far more dangerous. A fragment of science that no nation was willing to claim, yet none dared to destroy. Operation Eclipse vanished, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. The vaults remain buried, the coordinates erased, and the silence that follows is perhaps the only record that was meant to endure. Chapter 2: Ghost Signals over the Baltic Line. In December 1949, the Swedish coastal monitoring station at Härnösand logged a series of transmissions unlike anything previously catalogued. The signals were narrow band bursts between 14.92 and 15.04 MHz, repeating every 43 minutes with mechanical precision. Operators initially classified them as Soviet naval exercises, routine, even expected in the early years of the Cold War. But within days, cryptographic analysts in Stockholm realized the call sign embedded in the carrier tones. KMF 404 Mainz, belonged to a German Kriegsmarine unit officially dissolved in 1945. The Naval Archives confirmed the same. Gruppe 404, based in Gotenhafen, had been destroyed during the Soviet advance on the Baltic coast 4 years earlier. The Swedish government attempted to triangulate the origin of the transmissions. The coordinates led to open water east of Danzig, a sector then controlled by the Polish Navy under Soviet oversight. On January 4, 1950, the Royal Swedish Navy dispatched the signal vessel HSWMS Alfsnabben to conduct a survey. The ship's radio men recorded the signal in situ at 0200 hours, describing it as mechanical, non-vocal, but structured as if anticipating a response. The report was classified Försvarshemligt, Defense Secret, and transmitted directly to Stockholm's Defense Radio Establishment, FRA. From there, the information was quietly shared with both MI6 and the newly formed CIA under a restricted communications exchange known as Project Mercury. Within a month, a joint Anglo-American technical assessment began under a new designation, Directive Mariner. Internal FRA memoranda, later declassified, describe continued transmissions originating from beneath the Baltic continental shelf. The phenomenon baffled analysts. Hydrophone readings indicated a metallic echo, as if the broadcast emanated from a submerged structure. British intelligence, suspecting a Soviet sonar decoy, ordered covert aerial reconnaissance missions. On February 12, 1950, a RAF Lancaster modified for ELINT, electronic intelligence, flew 2 sorties over the sector. Its operators recorded the same pattern, though the signal strength inexplicably fluctuated with the aircraft's altitude. The plane's navigator, Flight Lieutenant Norman Rains, later described the interference in his debrief as not random static. It pulsed, almost like breathing. That spring, an encrypted cable from the US Embassy in Stockholm to Washington reported that Swedish technicians had partially decrypted fragments of the signal. The messages, once decoded, contained fragmented German words. Station Wotan active. Station Wotan active. Wotan had been the codename for a Luftwaffe radar guidance network dismantled by Allied forces in 1945. Its main control station near Lübeck had been destroyed in an air raid. The possibility that remnants of its system could still function was deemed impossible. Yet the phrases embedded within the signal repeated references to reactivation sequence, delta, control, and directive continuing until recall. The CIA dispatched a small liaison contingent to work, alongside Swedish and British teams at a temporary facility in Karlskrona. Among them was cryptanalyst Thomas A. Kirkwood, a veteran of Bletchley Park. Kirkwood's surviving diary, discovered among his personal effects after his death in 1979, records the team's growing unease. On March 23, 1950, he wrote, "The signal loops as if awaiting command. We've fed it standard acknowledgement tones and it changes tempo, as though listening. Greaves would have called it a ghost line." That reference, Greaves, is believed to allude to Captain Harold Greaves of Operation Eclipse, missing since 1945. No connection was ever officially confirmed. By April, the signals abruptly intensified. Soviet listening posts in Kaliningrad also detected the transmissions and accused Sweden of espionage. The situation nearly escalated into a diplomatic incident. Then, on April 19th, the transmissions ceased without warning. A single final broadcast was logged at 03:17 hours. A steady carrier tone, followed by 17 seconds of Morse code too degraded to decode. After that, silence. The Joint Task Group concluded its work in June 1950, classifying its findings under Mariner Archive 17B. The official summary dismissed the phenomenon as a remnant automated signal buoy likely of wartime German origin, reactivated by environmental interference. But the details within the appendices tell a different story. Technical log entries recorded electromagnetic surges strong enough to disrupt nearby compasses and radio receivers. Anomalous sonar returns suggested the existence of a metallic structure roughly 50 meters below the sea floor. One Swedish diver reported hearing a low mechanical hum like turbines, though the area was presumed solid sediment. His written statement was stricken from the record. In 1956, 6 years after the event, a retired Soviet naval officer, Captain Yuri Alexeyev, gave an off-record interview to a Polish journalist. His remarks, later translated and archived by the BBC monitoring service, described a secret KGB operation conducted in 1950, known internally as Operation Kovcheg. The mission had allegedly deployed deep-sea divers to investigate unexplained sonar echoes near the same Baltic coordinates. According to Alexeyev, the divers discovered a metallic dome partially buried, with German markings and a frozen radio beacon still active. He claimed the structure was dismantled and transported to a Soviet naval yard in Kronstadt, where it was sealed within a restricted hangar. Soviet archives make no mention of Kovcheg, but a 1951 memo from the Ministry of Defense references a Baltic anomaly device transferred for technical exploitation. By the 1970s, interest in the case re-emerged through the efforts of radio historian Olof Nyström, who managed to acquire fragments of the 1949 recordings from the FRA archives. Spectral analysis revealed patterns consistent with pulse width modulation technology, decades ahead of its supposed invention. Nyström's research concluded that the signal could not have been generated by natural interference. In 1983, he published a brief article in Nordic Communications Review, hypothesizing that Station Wotan had been part of an unfinished Third Reich early warning system designed to function autonomously, continuing its operational cycle even after the network's destruction. However, the most disturbing discovery came later. In 1992, a former British intelligence officer, identified only as RT in declassified files, submitted a statement to the Foreign Office's historical section. He claimed to have witnessed a demonstration in 1951 at RAF Fylingdales of captured German radio equipment, still transmitting under automated sequence. His report stated that the devices were recovered from Baltic maritime zone by Mariner Detachment and disassembled for study under RAF signal research. Within weeks of his testimony, the file was reclassified and sealed under the Official Secrets Act, not to be reviewed until 2045. Modern satellite scans of the Baltic seafloor conducted by geological teams in 2012 identified an anomaly near the original coordinates. A smooth, circular structure approximately 60 meters in diameter, metallic in composition, and buried under layers of sediment. The Swedish military denied any connection, though unofficial sources confirm the area remains restricted to civilian vessels. Attempts to revisit the site under academic license have been repeatedly declined. To this day, recordings of the ghost signals remain classified in their unaltered form. The fragments released to the public in the 1990s contain only static and faint rhythmic patterns. Yet analysts who have examined the originals under clearance describe modulated intervals corresponding to command protocols. Whether these represent a machine awaiting instruction or something more symbolic, a system refusing to die, is unknown. The term Baltic line persists in intelligence slang to describe a phenomenon that outlives its creators, a signal with no sender. But in one of the final pages of Kirkwood's diary, dated April 18, 1950, one day before the transmission ceased, he wrote a single line, underlined twice. "It's acknowledging us now." That entry was followed by 3 lines of coded shorthand never successfully deciphered. The next page was left blank, save for a faint fingerprint smudged into the paper as if pressed there in haste. No one knows whose it was. Chapter 3. The Cold Files of Operation Trident. By the time the Cuban Missile Crisis consumed the world's attention in 1962, another file, buried in the Pentagon's Naval Intelligence Archives, surfaced quietly under the heading, US Navy Joint Operation Trident. The file was stamped Deceased Mission, No Further Action. Yet, according to the memorandum that revived it, a sealed microfilm roll had been rediscovered within a mislabeled container at Fort Meade. The microfilm contained coordinates, partial weather reports, and one brief message dated 17 October 1944. Extraction incomplete, Trident compromised, containment required. The sender's name was redacted. Operation Trident had been born in secrecy in mid-1944, when Allied command suspected that German scientists were attempting to establish a hidden naval research station somewhere along the Norwegian coast. OSS Director William Donovan authorized the mission as a cooperative effort between British Naval Intelligence Division and the US Office of Strategic Services. The mission leader, Commander Elias Corwin, was a specialist in maritime sabotage, known for his prior work under Operation Source, which targeted the German battleship Tirpitz. The Trident team comprised 7 operatives, including 2 Norwegian resistance members. Their objective was to extract a defecting German physicist named Dr. Dieter Falk, who was believed to have developed experimental underwater detection, technology that could alter submarine warfare. The team departed from Scapa Flow aboard the modified submarine HMS Stubborn on 22 October 1944. Their infiltration point was near Tromsø, under cover of an RAF bombing diversion. According to surviving naval logs, contact with Trident was last received at 01:47 hours on 23 October. After that, the submarine reported heavy weather interference and silence. The mission was officially listed as lost with all hands, but the microfilm recovered in 1962 told a different story. Typed in uppercase letters on a coded page was a final entry. Object found below platform. Condition unknown. Falk non-compliant. The platform referenced was unknown to historians, but subsequent analysis by ONI investigators suggested it referred to a maritime structure, a sea-based lab, possibly anchored to the continental shelf. It was not until 1971 that Soviet naval records declassified after the Cold War provided supporting evidence. A KGB memorandum dated March 1958 described a wreckage site northwest of Tromsø containing Anglo-American identification. Plates, the divers sent to investigate reported. Metallic debris inconsistent, with known submarine hulls and spherical modules with no visible openings. The memo labeled the discovery Project Vostok, Trident Recovery, and classified it indefinitely. In 1972, US Navy Commander Alan Breslow, then attached to the Naval Historical Branch, requested access to the Trident files. His request was denied twice before he was summoned to a closed-door meeting with Admiral Jonas Kent. According to Breslow's later private notes, Kent told him, "Whatever Trident found wasn't German, and it wasn't ours." Breslow's notes continue. He said it was retrieved once, moved to Sandia Base, and neutralized in 47. The notation neutralized appeared in several later memos, though no one ever clarified whether it referred to technology, material, or personnel. Fragments of the recovered object were reportedly sent to Sandia Base under consignment. Item E2914 TRD. Laboratory logs from that period indicate a classified research program under the heading Applied Electromagnetic Containment Studies. One surviving technician's account, declassified in 2005, describes a metallic sphere approximately 1.8 meters in diameter with lattice reinforcement and unknown alloy composition. When exposed to certain frequencies, the sphere emitted radio bursts within the same range as known submarine communication bands. After 6 months of testing, it was disposed of via controlled thermal dissolution. No photographs remain, but the existence of the alloy was corroborated in a 1952 metallurgical analysis labeled Trident Sample, non-ferrous composite, unknown crystalline symmetry. The physicist at the center of Trident, Dr. Dieter Falk, was never officially accounted for. However, post-war interrogation transcripts of captured German naval officers mention a scientist of similar description detained briefly by the Soviets in 1946, near Murmansk. The record identifies him as Engineer FD, transferred to Moscow for scientific review. Nothing more is known. Western intelligence attempted to verify the claim, but all related documents were destroyed during the KGB archive purges of the late 1960s. In 1984, the Norwegian Maritime Institute launched an expedition to explore the continental shelf north of Tromsø, partly motivated by declassified NATO sonar charts. At 312 meters depth, researchers discovered a field of metallic debris partially embedded in sediment. Among the artifacts were fragments, consistent with 1940s British diving gear and a severely corroded steel plate bearing the partial serial TRD-04. Subsequent dives located the remains of what appeared to be a sunken pontoon platform constructed of advanced alloys not consistent with wartime metallurgy. The Norwegian government sealed the site immediately after, citing environmental hazards. When journalist Hannah Wilters attempted to publish her findings in 1991, she received an anonymous letter typed on unmarked paper. Cease further investigation into Operation Trident. Site remains classified under NATO security directive since 1944. No record exists. Wilters ignored the warning and continued her research. 3 months later, her home office in Oslo was burglarized and every document related to Trident was taken. No items of value were stolen. The police listed the incident as a domestic intrusion. A surviving US Navy report, declassified in 2017 under FOIA Case 14728, contains one of the few first-hand post-war references to Trident. Written by Lieutenant CMDR George M. Rusk, it states, "Our post-recovery examination of the Trident materials reveals evidence of a guided sonar modulation system decades ahead of our own capability. It appears designed to mask or distort depth perception readings of Allied radar. In layman's terms, it could render a vessel effectively invisible underwater." Rusk's memo concludes with a chilling line. If they had field-tested this system, the Atlantic campaign might have ended differently. What remains unresolved is the containment order found in the microfilm. Historians debate whether it referred to the recovered artifact or to something biological. A brief OSS addendum dated November 1944 references hazard protocols initiated, no further personnel to enter containment zone. If accurate, it implies that the mission may have encountered hazardous material, chemical, radiological or otherwise, before its disappearance. By the mid-1990s, Operation Trident had become a ghost story within naval circles, a cautionary tale about missions erased by their own success. Yet researchers who have examined the few declassified fragments agree on one point. The mission's results were not lost. They were buried. As one retired ONI officer told journalist John Helmer in 2002, "Trident was closed because it worked. The Cold War needed secrets, and some were too valuable to destroy. We just froze them in the archives." Today, the Tromsø coast remains quiet, the sea concealing what it always has. Fishing boats occasionally report sonar distortions and echoes that repeat at regular intervals. 4 bursts, 15 seconds apart. The same timing pattern recorded by Allied monitors in 1944. Norwegian authorities attribute it to thermal layering. Local fishermen call it the heartbeat. But among surviving intelligence officers, there is another name whispered for it still. The Trident Pulse. A signal that reminds them that some missions never truly end. They just change frequency. Chapter 4. Shadows Beneath the Reich's Ice Fortress. In 1951, as the United States extended its presence across the Arctic during the early Cold War, a team of Army engineers stationed in Greenland made an unsettling discovery beneath the ice. Their mission, part of a top-secret initiative called Project Iceworm, was to test the feasibility of constructing a nuclear launch system under the polar sheet, hidden, mobile, and immune to Soviet detection. But while drilling near the Camp Century construction zone, their seismic scans began returning anomalies, voids beneath the ice, not natural caverns, but symmetrical cavities that extended for hundreds of meters. The equipment readouts suggested reinforced steel or concrete walls deep below. Lieutenant Commander Paul Hennings, the site geologist, initially dismissed the results as echoes from glacial shearing. Then, on 12th of November 1951, a drilling probe pierced through what appeared to be hollow space. The core sample retrieved from that depth contained oxidized fragments of metal embossed with an unfamiliar insignia, the Reichsadler, the Nazi eagle. The discovery was quietly relayed to the Pentagon through classified channels. Within 72 hours, all data regarding the anomaly was removed from Camp Century's logs and replaced with falsified environmental entries. A directive from the Army Corps of Engineers ordered immediate excavation under a new sub-project, Iceworm Annex 3. What the team uncovered over the following week never appeared in official records. Excavators reached a reinforced hatch approximately 12 meters below the ice sheet. The hatch was welded shut and painted with a warning in faded German. Nicht öffnen, Gefahrstoff. Do not open, hazardous materials. Despite the warning, orders from Washington insisted on breaching it. The weld was cut on 19th November. Behind the door lay a corridor of riveted steel, the air stale but breathable, the walls lined with frost and discolored by time. Inside, engineers found a series of interconnected chambers, each containing rusted machinery and stacked steel crates stamped Morgenrot 3. The crates contained documents, tools and sealed glass containers filled with unknown fluids. A partially intact manifest dated February 1945 listed shipments from Peenemünde and Obersalzberg. The document referenced Operation Morgenrot, translated as Operation Dawn Red. Later cross-referencing revealed that Morgenrot was a contingency plan issued during the final collapse of the Reich, designed to relocate sensitive research and biological materials to remote or inaccessible locations. Among the list of transferred items were references to organic endurance samples, biothermal reserves, and cryogenic suspension. Lieutenant Henning's personal diary, recovered from his estate decades later, offers a haunting glimpse into what was found. An entry dated 21st November 1951 reads, "One of the jars shattered during removal. The smell was chemical, but something inside was shaped like tissue." Later entries grow more erratic. Washington wants the cargo flown out immediately. No photographs allowed. Men refusing to enter the lower chamber. The last note, dated 24th of November, states only, "They sealed it again, told us it never happened." On 28th November 1951, 4 C-54 Skymasters departed Thule Air Base under escort, carrying the recovered materials to Wright Field, Ohio, later identified as Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC property. The cargo was logged as industrial samples, refrigeration components, and no mention of biological materials appears anywhere in official manifests. Once the shipment reached US soil, it vanished into military custody under Arctic Recovery Directive, restricted E5. When Camp Sentry was officially decommissioned in 1967, the tunnels were abandoned, leaving behind decaying prefabricated structures and sealed ice corridors. For decades, nothing more was heard of Morgenrot. But in 1974, a Danish journalist named Knud Sørensen published a controversial article in Politiken claiming that classified US documents referenced German biological caches beneath Greenland. His source, a former US engineer, provided a photograph showing a steel plate marked Morgenrot 3, Eigentum des Reichsforschungsrat, property of the Reich Research Council. The US Embassy in Copenhagen immediately dismissed the story as fabricated. Sørensen's office was burglarized a week later, and his negatives destroyed. In 1989, glacial melting near the original Camp Sentry site exposed fragments of machinery, including a rusted container bearing faint stenciling in German. A Danish Arctic patrol recorded the coordinates and forwarded them to the US Air Force liaison stationed in Thule. The site was declared off-limits within 24 hours. A classified report from that same year, later declassified under the Freedom of Information Act, notes trace contamination of unknown origin, possible radiological hazard. The material was collected and shipped to the US under diplomatic seal. Throughout the 1990s, a handful of internal memoranda within the Department of Energy began to resurface references to Arctic Repository, Project M. The wording matched prior descriptions of Morgenrot Site 3. One memo, dated 5th of March 1992, describes the recovery of metallic cylinders containing organic remains preserved through low-temperature vitrification. Another memo states bluntly, "Material transferred to Fort Detrick for secondary containment, not to be catalogued under standard biological registry." Eyewitness accounts from former Army Corps personnel reinforce these implications. In a 2003 interview, retired technician Harold Pierce described a restricted operation conducted under extreme secrecy. "We were told it was experimental fuel storage, but when they brought the crates up, they were cold as death, and one of them broke open. Inside was glass, like an old laboratory jar, but something in it moved when the light hit it." Pierce died a year later. His testimony was never formally recorded. Theories about Morgenrot range from plausible to macabre. Some historians believe the Reich intended to preserve its most valuable biological and chemical research in cryogenic suspension, anticipating a post-war resurgence. Others suspect it was a final act of desperation, a bid to hide evidence of war crimes linked to human experimentation under the SS's Ahnenerbe Research Division. The presence of materials from Peenemünde suggests a link between rocket research and biochemical endurance testing, possibly related to high-altitude flight or long-duration survival. The final known reference to Operation Morgenrot appears in a NATO-classified annex from 1957, unearthed by Danish historians in 2016. The annex, titled Iceworm 13B, Arctic Retrieval Summary, contains a single paragraph that reads, "Biological storage units recovered from subglacial facility confirmed of German origin, 1944 or 45 manufacture. Contents unfit for transport. Disposal recommended per Attic Directive. Below the paragraph, an addendum was added in handwriting. Do not attempt reactivation. Secondary chamber remains sealed. Today, the Camp Century tunnels are collapsing under the weight of ice and time, but climate scientists warn that as the polar melt accelerates, deeper layers of the facility, including whatever lies in Morgenrot Site 3, may soon be exposed. The US government continues to classify all documents related to Project Iceworm and its annexes. For decades, rumors have circulated among Arctic researchers that an unnatural warmth radiates from certain buried sectors near the original site. Thermal scans have occasionally detected minor heat differentials inconsistent with surrounding permafrost. Official reports attribute it to microbial activity or decaying metal. Unofficial whispers suggest that something sealed decades ago may not have remained inert. The inscription on the recovered hatch plate, still preserved in a private collection in Copenhagen, bears one final line below the Reichsadler emblem, almost erased by corrosion but faintly legible under ultraviolet light. It reads, "Wird weiterleben unter dem Eis." It will live beneath the ice. Chapter 5. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Serpent. In the chaotic final days of March 1945, as Soviet forces pushed through the ruins of Pomerania, a coded transmission left the SS command bunker in Berlin under urgent classification, Operation Serpent, immediate execution. It was signed by General Hans Kammler, the architect of Germany's secret weapons programs. The message ordered the evacuation of sensitive materials and personnel from the port of Stettin to be delivered to designated northern facilities. The records suggest 3 ships comprised the convoy: Hagensberg, Weserland, and Kolberg. None of them were seen again. Official German naval logs ceased recording on 29 March 1945, the same night the convoy departed. Weather reports from that week describe violent storms sweeping across the Baltic, though Allied aerial reconnaissance noted heavy naval traffic in the region, far more than evacuation efforts alone could explain. British intercept teams at Bletchley Park decoded partial messages referencing Biologische Archive and priority cargo. American intelligence tagged the operation under a working code name, Uploon. When the war ended, no survivors from the convoy were ever found. The Hagensberg's registry was struck from record and its officers listed as missing. Soviet post-war naval documents mention unidentified German vessels sunk under unclear circumstances near Bornholm, but the KGB sealed the file in 1959. According to defectors interviewed decades later, divers were dispatched from Leningrad in 1958 under Directive 68-5, searching for wrecks linked to an SS transport carrying hazardous material. The mission was aborted after 2 divers reportedly suffered chemical burns following brief exposure to the cargo holds. For decades, Operation Serpent was dismissed as another myth of Nazi flight, a rumor conflating the last desperate evacuations of German research personnel. Then, in 1989, a classified MI5 brief surfaced amid the declassification of Cold War materials. The document, filed under Baltic Grid 42 Degrain, Case S49, contained a chilling summary. Residual contamination consistent with industrial mercury and unknown isotopic traces. Wreck identification uncertain. Recovery not advised. The report linked the contamination to a wreck located at coordinates 40 degree 13 EN, 15 degree 07 E, directly along the projected route from Stettin to neutral Sweden. Archival material from the OSS also offers fragments of corroboration. A surviving memo dated April 2, 1945, written by operative James Fulmer, notes, "We have confirmation from Polish coastal agents that German naval personnel loaded sealed steel drums onto convoy departing 29th March. Cargo, marked with Serpent insignia, no manifest, guards in full SS Medical Corps uniform. Rumor suggests experimental fuel or bacterial compound." The memo ends abruptly with a handwritten note. Intercept lost. Request recon by air. Too late. In the early 1970s, Swedish Maritime Archives recorded a peculiar incident. A fishing vessel operating off the coast of Karlskrona recovered a section of steel plating inscribed with faded Gothic script. The fragment bore the word Schutzbehälter, Protective container. Laboratory testing revealed traces of an unusual alloy blended with mercury and uranium byproducts. The Swedish Navy quietly confiscated the artifact, listing it as industrial waste of unknown wartime origin. The artifact was later transferred to a NATO environmental program and disappeared from all public record. In 1991, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Polish divers conducted independent explorations of the Baltic Sea's deeper wreck zones. Using side-scan sonar, they identified a vessel approximately 70 meters in length, resting at a depth of 84 meters, its hull remarkably intact. Radiation meters detected faint anomalies near the cargo holds. Divers reported a large serpent emblem painted along the stern. Footage captured from the dive was confiscated by Polish naval authorities within days. The divers were warned under military secrecy statutes not to discuss their findings. One of them, Diver Tomasz Kowalik, later defected to Sweden. Before his disappearance in 1994, he gave a brief recorded statement to journalist Anders Hjelm, stating, "The cargo holds were sealed with welded plates. We managed to cut one corner. Inside we saw rows of containers, still marked with SS medical symbols. Each was surrounded by frost, as if the cold had never left. When we shone the light in, something shimmered, like liquid metal moving inside glass." Kowalik was found dead 2 weeks later, ruled an accident. His belongings, including the recorded cassette, were seized by Swedish security police. Rumors surrounding the true contents of Operation Serpent have persisted for decades. Some historians suggest the convoy carried the biological remains of human experimentation from camps in Poland and Czechoslovakia, evacuated to prevent Allied discovery. Others argue it contained a prototype fuel additive derived from heavy water research in Norway. But a smaller, more ominous theory connects it to an SS program known as Project Gorgon, an initiative focused on weaponizing nerve agents and radiation-resistant compounds for long-term preservation of biological matter. An American intelligence cable from 1952 lends weight to this theory. It references the recovery of unidentified containers from Baltic wreck site, believed to be part of Nazi bioweapon transport. US naval involvement denied. Another line, redacted but partially legible, reads, "Specimen stable at sub-zero temperature, reactivity unknown." The cable was signed by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Kinlan, formerly of Operation Eclipse. His involvement in a case 7 years after his disappearance from public record remains unexplained. Attempts to locate the wrecks of Operation Serpent have been repeatedly obstructed by official denials and restricted maritime zones. The area north of Bornholm remains one of the most heavily monitored sectors in the Baltic, with overlapping claims from NATO and Russian Federation surveillance networks. Independent researchers who have tried to access the coordinates report equipment failures, magnetic interference, and unexplained power losses. In 2018, a Danish research vessel operating under a climate survey accidentally detected elevated chemical readings in the same sector. The data was suppressed, but a leaked copy reached investigative journalist Erik Lunde. His article, published briefly before retraction, cited internal Danish Navy communications describing traces of organophosphates and isotopic mercury. The official statement claimed it was a legacy chemical dump. Privately, sources within the Navy confirmed the coordinates matched the old Serpent route. The mystery deepens when one considers the consistent reappearance of certain personnel names across the decades. Documents from the 1950s link several scientists associated with Operation Serpent to early NATO biological defense programs in the United States and Canada. Among them was Dr. Anton Weiss, the same name that appeared in the Eclipse files. Weiss's post-war employment records place him at Fort Detrick in 1953, working under classified projects that have never been disclosed. Today, naval sonar operators still speak of a cold echo that appears intermittently near Bornholm, a reflective signature that moves without current, surfacing briefly before vanishing again. They call it the Serpent Shadow. Official maritime maps list no wreck at that location. The seafloor remains undisturbed, yet the echo continues to return, rhythmic and unwavering. The fate of Operation Serpent endures as one of the final enigmas of the war. A convoy erased from history, its cargo untouched, its purpose obscured by layers of silence. The last entry in the surviving OSS field file dated April 6, 1945, contains only one sentence, typed in faded ink across the bottom margin. Cargo lost at sea. Recovery inadvisable. Contamination possible. Seal and forget. And so they did. The sea keeps its secrets, and the serpent sleeps beneath it still, waiting for the next signal to rise. When the archives close and the lights of history dim, only fragments remain. Names half erased, files redacted, whispers buried beneath the weight of denial. The war was said to have ended in 1945, yet its embers still glow in sealed vaults and frozen wastes. Operation Eclipse, Morgenrot, Serpent, threads in a web that stretches from the ruins of Berlin to the laboratories of the Cold War and beyond. Each recovered document answers one question only to raise another. What was buried was not merely evidence, but intent. And as the ice melts, as forgotten wrecks rise again from the sea, one must wonder if the silence that followed victory was ever peace at all.